Charles Nordby was born in San Francisco on August 8th in 1924 and lived in Point Arena, the tiny lighthouse community on the Mendocino County coastline in Northern California. His father was a sailor, and his mother was a local teacher and big band singer. Eventually, she ran off with a band leader who was performing at the Rio Nido Resort along the Russian River in Sonoma County. She abandoned Charles at the age of 2, who then went to stay with his grandparents. His grandfather was the judge and postmaster in this little town. With minimal supervision from his grandparents, he spent much of his childhood at the local filling station, where the men would gather to play poker. This is where he began mastering the game, reading people and their expressions, honing his skills with numbers, and learning how to outsmart the locals at whatever game they were playing. He became a regular in the game and a favorite with the men in town who marveled at his gambling skills at such a young age. As Charles grew older, so did his ambitions, eventually driving him to enlist in the Merchant Marines right after high school, where he would serve his country during World War II. While in Egypt, Charles caught malaria and was thought to be dying. As he laid on his deathbed in the hospital, he heard his ship's engine starting. He recognized the sound well since he had docked at many ports. His ship was deporting, and he refused to die there, so he jumped out of his hospital bed and ran towards the harbor as fast as he could. He reached his ship just in time to board and was treated by the cruise doctor and recovered from his illness. In retelling this story, you could hear the emotion of fear that he felt at the time that he was going to die in Egypt. Another story he once shared with me was about the time his crew was having a fun day out at sea. They decided to pick up Charles and throw him overboard. Little did they know that Charles couldn't swim. The only friend on the ship at the time who knew that he couldn't swim wandered onto the deck and asked what all the excitement was. They said,
"We just threw Nordby overboard."
His friend screamed out,
"What? Charlie can't swim!"
They all hurriedly began a frantic rescue, and just as he was going down under the water, they were able to pull him back up to the ship's deck. Once again, he faced and escaped death. He had a faith in God since he was a little child because his grandmother was the Sunday school teacher. His whole life was full of challenges and dangerous situations. I remember talking to him later in life, and he reflected back over the years and would say, "I know that God was with me, or I wouldn't have made it through all those years." After completing his military service on the high seas, during which he safely delivered weapons and supplies around the globe, he docked in the San Francisco Bay Area. While in Oakland, he wandered into a small supermarket where he noticed a charming young lady. He struck up a conversation with her and soon learned that she frequented the store regularly. After their playful exchange, he approached the store manager and inquired about a job. When the manager asked if he had experience with produce, Charles confidently replied, "Yes, of course." Despite knowing very little about fruits and vegetables, he was certain he could keep up the charade long enough to secure a date with the lovely woman. And so he did. He quickly learned the skills necessary to keep the job, marry the cute girl, and they soon began a family. Not just any family, but a large one. Their first child, Charlie Jr., was born in 1946, followed by Carol in 1947, Thomas in 1949, and John and Claudia in 1950. Frank arrived in 1951, and 5 years later, in 1956, Jack was born. Then, in 1960, twins Jerry and Terry completed their clan of 9. 10 years after starting at the market as a produce clerk, Charles broke his back while lifting a heavy crate of lettuce. This injury altered the course of his life. With 6 children at home, he was determined to return to work as soon as possible. However, it soon became clear that his back injury was too severe, preventing him from returning to his role as a produce clerk. During his decade in that position, Charles realized that his skills in math, people, and what he called his sixth sense made him acutely aware of various aspects of the retail environment that went beyond simple produce. He successfully persuaded the market owners to allow him to examine the overall operation of the stores and implement changes to reduce costs stemming from inefficient business practices, mismanagement, and losses due to theft by customers, employees, and suppliers. Once granted access to the entire grocery store operation, he became aware of countless ways retail businesses could fail and began educating the owners on better practices that would lead to increased profits. In the 1960s, he presented his case before the state of California aiming to convince officials that retailers statewide were experiencing theft losses that exceeded what stores could write off. At that time, all retailers in California were permitted a 1% write-off for losses due to theft. Thanks to Charles Nordby's expertise and testimony, the state of California amended the law to allow all retailers a 2% write-off for theft losses. That single percentage increase has saved retailers billions of dollars in theft loss write-offs over the past 50 years. In Berkeley in 1969, he suspected that an assistant manager at one of the stores he was consulting for was pilfering cash from the drawers. One Sunday afternoon, Charles watched the assistant manager through binoculars from across the street. After 5 hours of observing the employee's every move, he concluded that the assistant manager was unlikely to steal during the shift. So, he headed home to East Bay area, a 30-minute drive away. However, after just a few blocks, he made a sudden U-turn, sensing that something was amiss at the grocery store. He noticed that none of the clerks were behaving as they usually did. Each one was carrying their cash drawers and marching in order in the front lobby of the store. Quickly, he pulled into the store's parking lot with his headlights off. He exited the car and ducked down to peer through the plate glass windows at the front of the store. His instincts were correct. Something was definitely wrong. He saw 3 men brandishing guns at the clerks and forcing them into the back room. Charles immediately called the police, and when they arrived, they promptly broke the front window of the store. Gunfire erupted, leading to fears that the gunmen were executing the clerks inside the meat locker. Once Charles and the police gained entry into the store, they rushed to the back room and found all the clerks unharmed in the meat locker. The 3 gunmen were apprehended and prosecuted. Had Charles not trusted his intuition and returned to the store after watching it all afternoon, the outcome for those grocery clerks could have been tragic. In 1971, during his visits to the gaming rooms in Sonoma County, he uncovered that nearly all of these establishments were involved in drugging, cheating, and robbing clients who were gambling at the local card tables. He persuaded Sonoma County's district attorney to allow him to infiltrate these card rooms as an undercover poker player and report back on his observations while playing. Upon completing his undercover work and submitting his report to the district attorney's office, the findings sent shockwaves through the local gaming industry, resulting in the loss of gaming licenses for 3 card rooms. In that same year, Nordby designed and constructed a 2-way mirror intended to assist businesses in monitoring their operations. These mirrors allowed owners and managers to observe employees, customers, vendors, and potential threats without anyone being aware they were under surveillance. Accompanying each 32 by 32-inch protruding mirror was an equally large sign, clearly warning individuals of the surveillance and indicating that an observer was watching their every move. These mirrors are now installed in hundreds of stores and various businesses throughout Northern California and Nevada. In 1973, Charles learned that a small chain of stores in the Sacramento area was facing serious financial difficulties. He reached out to the company's president to arrange a meeting to discuss how he could assist in overcoming the challenges they were experiencing. This company was Vans Markets, and Pete Stathos was the president. After a 2-hour drive from Sonoma County to Sacramento, Charles arrived at the Vans offices, only to be informed by the secretary that Pete Stathos was on the golf course and had likely forgotten about their appointment. Disappointed after traveling so far only to be stood up, Charles recalled another company in Sacramento that was also struggling financially. He located their number and called them from a payphone. The company was Raley's Supermarkets, based in Sacramento. A man answering the phone identified himself as Chuck Collings, who turned out to be the president of the company. He was personally answering calls because they could no longer afford a full-time secretary. Charles Nordby introduced himself to Chuck Collings and explained how his program could benefit their company. Collings invited Charles to the Raley's main office in downtown Sacramento, which was located in an old rundown building that reflected the company's decline. Charles met with Chuck Collings and presented his profit-increasing program. Collings was intrigued by what Charles had to offer and asked him to return in a couple of hours to explain his program to the other 2 vice presidents. When Charles returned, he detailed how his program could help their company. After considering his proposal, the 3 men realized they had nothing to lose. They understood they were stuck in a vicious cycle of robbing Peter to pay Paul, fully aware of their precarious financial situation, a reality that Charles Nordby was unaware of when he stepped in. However, he viewed this 50-store chain as an opportunity to showcase his program and expertise, convinced that this would be his big break. He envisioned taking his wife on a vacation that she had never gotten a chance to have, because she had always been at home with the children. At that time, there were only 3 children at home, and Jack was old enough to care for the younger twins, Jerry and Terry. In the final quarter of 1973, they agreed to allow Nordby to implement his program in 6 of their worst-performing stores in the Sacramento area. However, when Nordby realized that the program would require some upfront investment, he was shocked to find that the company had no funds to even begin. Knowing the impact he could have on their profits and recognizing this as his chance for pay and acknowledgement after years of refining his program, he borrowed money from a friend in San Francisco on behalf of Raley's so he could get to work. The first thing he did was begin visiting every store unannounced to observe their operations. Charles Nordby entered each establishment with the authority to take necessary actions and started documenting the reasons for the company's bankruptcy and what needed to be done to prevent it. The mismanagement was staggering. Employees were stealing, vendors were inflating their invoices, and customers were openly shoplifting since no one had ever intercepted them. He subsequently hired a few men whom he could train to do exactly what the company required. One of these men became not only one of his closest friends, but also served as a loyal confidant and eyewitness to nearly everything Charles was doing. His name is Warren Miller, and he is still alive today. Charles and his family were all extremely grateful that he had a friend like Warren. The challenges facing the Raley's operation were beyond the comprehension of those involved, a result of years of mismanagement under an absentee owner, Tom Raley. Charles immediately began rewriting company policies. Whenever he noticed something amiss, he drafted a new policy to address it. He installed his loss prevention 2-way mirrors and warning signs in strategic locations throughout the stores, ensuring they were highly visible in areas prone to theft. These strategies sparked a buzz among employees, vendors, store management, and customers. Everyone felt as though they were being watched by the mysterious individuals monitoring the security mirrors. By the end of the first quarter of his program, the stores were already profitable. Millions began to flow in, and Raley's experienced their highest profits ever. Charles Nordby had the ability to catch anyone at any time. However, the con men at Raley's were so deeply entrenched in their deceit, cloaked in the finest sheep's clothing, that even Nordby failed to recognize Chuck Collings and James Teal as the biggest thieves he had ever encountered until it was too late. Their primary intention for Nordby from the very beginning appeared to be to steal, kill, and destroy. They robbed him of the information he needed to survive. They eliminated him like criminals dispose of their victims to avoid leaving witnesses. Little did they know that one of his sons was observing their crime. Then they attempted to erase his legacy by omitting him from their history and the narrative of their success. Unbeknownst to them, their history book contained the DNA of their wrongdoing. Most criminals are unaware that they leave their DNA behind at the scene of their crimes. When Raley's constructed their false narrative of Tom Raley's success story, they not only left their DNA at the scene, but also returned to the very site of their crime. Charles Nordby diligently rolled out his innovative programs to rescue the struggling chain. He unknowingly aligned himself with wolves disguised as allies. While profits soared and the stores began to flourish, the greed of Chuck Collings and James Teal became painfully evident, their betrayal a dagger in Charles's back. Despite his hard work and dedication, they exploited his insights for their own benefit, aiming to erase him from their ascent to success.